Chapter 1. The First Encounter. The air was thick with tension as Arden and Elias met for the first time in the forest clearing, under the glow of the setting sun. Arden's eyes narrowed at the sight of the stranger standing before him. His long, dark hair falling softly around his face, his demeanor calm yet assured. Arden, a warrior hardened by years of survival, was accustomed to fighting, not conversations. Yet, when Elias stepped closer, there was something about him that made the air between them feel charged. "Who are you?" Arden asked, voice rough with suspicion. Elias met his gaze with gentle determination, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm someone who won't hurt you," he replied softly. But it was more than just words. It was the way his eyes lingered on Arden, as though searching for something hidden in the depths of him. Arden shifted uncomfortably, feeling something stir within him, an unwanted pull. He stepped back, wary of the sudden intensity he felt. But Elias remained steady, not backing away. "You don't need to fear me," Elias continued, his voice tender but firm. "I can see the pain in your eyes, Arden. And I won't leave you alone with it." A heavy silence hung between them. Arden wanted to turn away, to walk back into the shadows where he could be alone, where he didn't have to confront these emotions bubbling beneath the surface. But Elias' presence was magnetic. Without thinking, Arden reached up, a reflexive gesture to rub his temples, and that's when Elias closed the distance, placing a hand gently on his arm. The touch was warm, comforting in a way that unsettled Arden. "Please," Elias whispered, his face just inches from Arden's. "I'm not going anywhere." Before Arden could protest, their lips met in a fleeting kiss. It was soft, hesitant, but something in it lingered, igniting a fire that Arden couldn't control. He pulled away sharply, his chest tight, but Elias only looked at him with quiet understanding. "I don't need this," Arden muttered, his voice low, but Elias' hand gently cupped his cheek, grounding him. "You do," Elias replied softly, his thumb tracing the edge of Arden's jaw. "You just don't know it yet." Chapter 2. The Push and Pull. Over the following days, Arden found himself torn between his instincts and the growing connection with Elias. Every time their eyes met, the attraction was undeniable, but so was his resistance. He couldn't allow himself to fall for someone like Elias, not someone so pure, so kind. It was a weakness he couldn't afford. Yet Elias persisted. His presence was always there, just behind Arden, steady and unwavering. Their conversations began to shift, from awkward silences to subtle exchanges of smiles, and slowly, touches. When Elias reached out to pass him a drink, their fingers brushed, and Arden's breath hitched in his chest. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, but neither said anything about it. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias stepped closer to Arden, his hand reaching for the edge of his cloak. Arden stiffened, but Elias' gaze was gentle, coaxing him to let go of the tension that kept him trapped. "Arden," Elias whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I see you. And I want you to see me too." Without waiting for a response, Elias leaned in, pressing his lips softly against Arden's. The kiss was light at first, an exploration of what had been left unsaid for too long. But as Elias' lips parted slightly, urging Arden to deepen the kiss, the world around them seemed to fall away. Arden's hands found their way to Elias' waist, pulling him closer, as though he needed to feel him, to make sure he was real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, but their eyes locked, and for the first time, Arden didn't feel the need to pull away. He felt wanted, loved, even. "I didn't think it would feel like this," Arden whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Elias smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Arden's forehead. "Neither did I. But it's real. I know it is." Chapter 3. Resistance and Temptation. The days following their kiss were filled with a strange mixture of longing and confusion. Arden could feel the pull of Elias' touch every time they were near each other. It was like a constant ache, deep inside him, demanding to be addressed. But Arden wasn't ready. He couldn't be. His past was filled with too much pain, too many losses to open up now. Not like this. Not with Elias. But Elias, relentless as always, continued to press. Every touch felt like an invitation. Whether it was their fingers brushing while sharing food or the way Elias' hand would rest gently on his back when they walked together, it all felt like an invitation to something more. Something dangerous. One night, as they set up camp near a quiet stream, Arden found himself unable to resist any longer. Elias, ever so patient, sat beside him, his body radiating warmth and quiet understanding. When Arden glanced over, he saw the soft vulnerability in Elias' eyes. "You know you don't have to hide from me," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. Arden swallowed hard, fighting the emotions that surged within him. "I don't know how to stop hiding." Elias reached for him then, his hands gentle as they cupped Arden's face. He leaned in, brushing his lips against Arden's in a soft, tender kiss that left them both breathless. The kiss deepened this time, their mouths opening, tongues seeking, exploring. Arden's hands trembled as they slid over Elias' chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat under his fingertips. Arden didn't pull away. He couldn't. His body was alive with desire, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and longing. When they finally broke apart, both were panting, their chests heaving. "I can't stop," Arden admitted, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I want you too much." Elias smiled, his thumb brushing over Arden's lower lip. "You don't have to stop. I want you too. All of you." Chapter 4. Silent Battles. The weeks passed, and their bond only grew stronger. But it wasn't without its struggles. Arden's heart was still conflicted. Part of him wanted to give in fully, to let go of the past and embrace Elias. But another part of him was afraid of the intensity of what they shared, afraid of losing himself in someone else. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Elias leaned in close, his breath warm against Arden's ear. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. Arden stiffened, his heart racing. "I don't know how to do this. How to trust." Elias cupped his face, his thumb brushing over Arden's cheek. "I'll help you. We'll take it one step at a time." And then, as if to prove his words, Elias leaned in, capturing Arden's lips with his in a slow, deliberate kiss. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. Arden's hand slid up Elias' chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the undeniable warmth. When their kiss deepened, the air around them seemed to thrum with electric energy. Elias' hands moved to Arden's waist, pulling him closer, and Arden responded in kind, his body pressing against Elias, their heat mingling. They pulled apart only to catch their breath, but neither of them moved away. Instead, they simply stayed there, forehead to forehead, letting the moment settle between them. "You're everything I didn't know I needed," Arden whispered, his voice full of wonder and uncertainty. Elias smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "And you're everything I've been waiting for." Chapter 6. The Awakening. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting a soft golden hue across the clearing. Arden woke up in Elias' arms, his chest rising and falling with every breath they took together. He had never felt so at peace, yet so exposed. The vulnerability he had fought so hard to avoid was now standing before him, wrapped in the warmth of Elias' embrace. Elias stirred beside him, his fingers gently tracing over Arden's shoulder, making the warmth in Arden's chest expand. "Good morning," Elias whispered, his voice rough from sleep, but full of affection. Arden's heart skipped a beat at the tenderness in Elias' voice. He leaned in, pressing his lips to Elias' forehead, a soft and lingering kiss that spoke volumes of his feelings he had yet to fully comprehend. Elias smiled, his eyes half-lidded, and pulled Arden closer. "You're mine now, aren't you?" Elias asked, his words barely audible, a touch of teasing in his tone. Arden hesitated, unsure of how to respond. His instincts screamed that this bond, this connection, was dangerous. But when he looked into Elias' eyes, something shifted inside him. He realized he couldn't run anymore. The pull between them was too strong. "Yeah," Arden murmured, voice thick with emotion, "I'm yours." Elias' smile deepened, and in that moment, Arden felt a sense of belonging he had never known. He had found his place, right here in Elias' arms, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe in it fully. Chapter 7. A Tangle of Emotions. The days that followed were filled with passion, but also with confusion. The tenderness that had marked their first moments together was slowly replaced by an urgency, a need that neither could ignore. When they weren't speaking, they were touching, small gestures that quickly escalated. Their kisses were deep, their touches tender, but with an underlying intensity that made everything between them feel more dangerous and alive. One night, as they sat by the fire, the air thick with unspoken words, Arden found his gaze locked with Elias. The distance between them had never felt so vast, even though they were seated so close. "You make me feel things I never thought I'd feel," Arden confessed, his voice quiet but full of raw emotion. "But I don't know if I can trust this thing between us." Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his hand resting gently on Arden's thigh, grounding him. His touch was warm, soothing, as if telling Arden it was okay to feel uncertain. "You don't have to trust it all right now," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "But know this, I won't hurt you. Not intentionally." Arden exhaled shakily, his heart a tumultuous mess. "I want to believe you," he whispered, his hand sliding up to Elias' chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Elias leaned in, capturing Arden's lips with his. The kiss was slow, deliberate, as if to reassure him that he was safe in Elias' arms. But it didn't stop there. Their kisses deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate. Elias' hand slid up Arden's back, pressing him closer, as their bodies began to mirror the same rhythm. Arden's hands traced the muscles of Elias' chest, feeling the taut skin beneath his fingertips. He pulled away for a brief moment, both of them panting from the heat building between them. "We can't stop now, can we?" Arden asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, but it held the weight of everything unspoken. "No," Elias responded, his lips brushing against Arden's ear, his words hot against his skin. "We don't have to." Chapter 8. Testing Limits. The days stretched on, and their connection grew stronger, more intimate. But with each step forward, Arden found himself questioning the consequences. Elias, however, was unwavering. He wasn't afraid of the intensity of their bond. If anything, he welcomed it. One evening, as they found a quiet spot by the river, Arden felt the weight of his feelings pressing down on him. He stood at the edge, gazing into the flowing water, trying to gather his thoughts. Elias approached silently, coming up behind him. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around Arden's waist, pulling him close. "I can't help myself around you," Elias murmured, his lips grazing the back of Arden's neck. His hand slid under Arden's shirt, warm against his skin, sending a shiver down his spine. Arden closed his eyes, his body reacting involuntarily. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I didn't ask for you to make me feel everything." Elias' hand slid to Arden's chest, caressing the hard planes of his body. "You don't have to ask," Elias replied softly. "You just have to accept it." Arden turned around slowly, his heart pounding as he looked into Elias' eyes. He reached out, cupping Elias' face, the roughness of his stubble grazing his palm. "I don't know how," Arden confessed. "I've never been good at this. At trusting someone." Elias leaned in, kissing Arden softly, reassuringly. The kiss deepened, becoming more insistent as their bodies pressed together, the heat between them building with every movement. Arden's hands slid to Elias' shoulders, pulling him closer, their bodies melding into one. Elias' hands slid lower, grasping Arden's hips with a possessive but gentle grip. "You don't have to figure it all out now," he whispered between kisses. "Just let go, let me love you." Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. That night, everything changed. The tension that had been building between them finally reached its breaking point. Arden had fought so hard to keep his walls intact, but with each touch from Elias, they cracked further, until they shattered completely. They found themselves in the secluded shelter they had set up for the night, and the moment the door closed behind them, Elias was on him. His lips were fierce, demanding, but filled with tenderness. Arden's hands pulled at Elias' shirt, desperate to feel more of him, to lose himself in the fire that burned between them. Their kisses were frantic now, their bodies pressed together with a hunger that neither could deny. Arden's hands moved down Elias' chest, tracing the outline of his muscles, and Elias responded with a groan, his hands roaming over Arden's back. "I want you," Arden gasped, his voice hoarse with desire. Elias' eyes darkened, and he pulled Arden closer, if that was even possible. "Then take me," he murmured against Arden's lips. "Take all of me." The room was filled with the sound of their breaths, their kisses, the frantic rustle of clothes. And in the chaos of it all, there was a stillness that settled between them, a deep, unwavering connection that neither could deny. When they finally collapsed into each other's arms, their bodies tangled together, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes, louder than anything else ever could. Chapter 10. No Turning Back. The next morning, Arden woke up to find Elias still asleep beside him, his arm draped over Arden's waist. For a moment, Arden simply stared at him, feeling the weight of the night before. He had crossed a line he never thought he would. But there was no turning back now. Elias stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He smiled sleepily when he saw Arden's gaze on him. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice soft, but filled with warmth. Arden swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he confessed, his voice barely audible. Elias reached for him, his fingers brushing Arden's cheek gently. "I know you're scared," Elias replied, "but we'll figure it out together. One step at a time." Arden nodded slowly, the weight of his fears still heavy on his chest. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone in them. Elias was there, unwavering, a constant presence beside him. "I'm not going anywhere," Elias said, his voice firm, yet gentle. "Not now, not ever." And for the first time in a long while, Arden believed him. Chapter 11. The Weight of the Past. The days began to blur into one another, but with every sunrise, Arden found himself falling deeper for Elias. The moments they shared were intoxicating, and yet a gnawing unease lingered at the back of Arden's mind. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The fear of vulnerability that had kept him distant from others was creeping in once again, threatening to break the fragile trust they had built. One evening, as they sat by the campfire, Arden's gaze shifted to Elias, who was staring into the flames, his expression unreadable. He could sense something was off, something hidden beneath the surface. His heart raced, knowing that whatever it was, they needed to confront it. "Elias," Arden began, his voice shaky, "what's going on? You've been distant lately." Elias didn't look at him at first, his jaw tightening as he tried to keep his emotions under control. When he finally turned his gaze to Arden, there was a flicker of something, regret, maybe fear, before he masked it again with that same confident demeanor Arden had come to know. "I'm fine," Elias lied, but the way his eyes avoided Arden's gave him away. "It's just something from my past. Nothing to worry about." Arden's heart clenched. He could feel the weight of Elias' words, the ones left unsaid. "You know you can talk to me," Arden whispered, leaning closer, his fingers brushing Elias' arm. The warmth between them was undeniable, but so was the distance Elias was trying to maintain. "I know," Elias said quietly, his voice breaking for the first time. He reached out, pulling Arden closer and kissing him gently, a kiss filled with longing and desperation, as though he was trying to convey everything he couldn't say in words. When they pulled away, Elias' forehead rested against Arden's, his breath shaky. "I've lost so much," he admitted. "I've hurt people I loved. And I'm terrified I'll lose you too. That you'll see the real me and run." Arden's heart broke. He cupped Elias' face gently, their noses brushing. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. "Not now. Not ever." Chapter 12. Trusting the Unknown. As the days passed, Arden continued to reassure Elias with his presence. But Elias' struggles were becoming more apparent. His need for control, for distance, was growing, even as his attraction to Arden intensified. It was a battle inside of him, one that he fought silently, but Arden could see it in the way he clenched his fists or avoided looking him in the eyes. One night, after a long day of traveling, they found a quiet spot by a lake. The moonlight reflected off the water, and Arden felt a strange peace settle over him, though the tension between them still remained. "I need you to trust me," Arden said softly, sitting beside Elias. His fingers grazed the back of Elias' hand, a gentle touch that conveyed everything he felt. "I'm not going to hurt you." Elias' eyes softened, But there was still doubt. "It's not about you hurting me," he replied, his voice low and pained. "It's about me hurting you." Arden took Elias' hand, intertwining their fingers, grounding him in the present. "Whatever happens, we face it together," Arden said, his voice strong and unwavering. "I'm not afraid of your past. I'm here for the future we can build." Elias met his gaze, his expression raw with emotion. Slowly, he leaned forward, brushing his lips against Arden's in a soft kiss. The kiss was gentle at first, but the heat between them grew, their bodies instinctively drawing closer. Their lips parted, and Arden's fingers slid to Elias' neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, filled with all the things they hadn't said, all the emotions that had been left unspoken. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless, their bodies pressed close. "I trust you," Elias whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Arden smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "And I trust you," he replied, his hands gently caressing Elias' jaw. Chapter 13. Breaking Barriers. The connection between them was undeniable, but Elias' hesitation was becoming harder to ignore. Arden knew he had to help him break through those final walls Elias had built around himself. So, one night, when they found themselves alone by the fire, Arden took the chance. "Elias," he started softly, his voice full of determination. "You can't keep holding back. I see the way you look at me, the way you touch me. It's like you're afraid to fall too deep. But we're already in this. I'm already in this." Elias' eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as if Arden had just hit a nerve. He stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning back to face Arden, his expression conflicted. "I don't know how to do this, Arden. I don't know how to just give myself to someone without fearing I'll lose them." Arden stood up and walked toward him, his steps slow but purposeful. He reached out, gently placing a hand on Elias' chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath his fingers. "You won't lose me," he said quietly. "Not if you let me in. I want all of you, Elias. All your pain, all your fear, all of you." Elias swallowed hard, his hands shaking as they found their way to Arden's waist, pulling him closer. "I can't promise I won't hurt you," Elias whispered. "But I promise I'll try." Arden smiled softly, his hands resting on Elias' shoulders. "That's all I need," he replied. "We'll figure it out. Together." With that, they leaned into each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both gentle and fiery. The kiss grew deeper, more urgent, as their bodies pressed together. Every touch, every caress, was a step forward in their journey, one that neither could escape nor wanted to. Chapter 14. Full Commitment. Their connection was undeniable, and it felt like the entire world faded away when they were together. One afternoon, as they lay on the grass beneath the trees, Elias' hand gently traced patterns on Arden's arm. The peace they shared in these moments was enough to make Arden believe in something deeper than himself. "You make me feel like I belong," Arden whispered, his voice barely audible as he closed his eyes. He could feel Elias' heartbeat beneath his chest, steady and sure. Elias looked down at him, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You do belong. You belong with me, Arden." Arden opened his eyes and met Elias' gaze, searching for any sign of hesitation. Instead, he found only sincerity. He reached up, cupping Elias' face in his hands, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady rhythm of his breath. "I don't know what the future holds," Arden admitted, "but I want to face it with you." Elias leaned in, kissing him deeply, the kiss full of promise and passion. They broke apart for only a moment before Elias whispered against his lips, "Then let's face it together." Their kisses grew more fervent, more desperate, their bodies pushing closer until there was no space between them. The world around them ceased to exist as they gave in to the moment, surrendering themselves to the bond they couldn't escape. Chapter 15. A Promise of Forever. Days turned into weeks, and with every passing moment, Arden and Elias' bond grew. Their connection was no longer just about the physical. Though their intimacy was still intense, it was now intertwined with emotional depth. One evening, as they stood together overlooking a vast expanse of land, Elias turned to Arden, his eyes soft with affection. "I want you to know that I'm all in," he said, his voice steady. No more walls. No more doubts. Arden's heart swelled, and he placed his hand over Elias' heart. I'm with you. I always will be. Elias kissed him deeply, a kiss that spoke of forever, of promises made and promises kept. They had faced their fears, their insecurities, and now they stood together, stronger than ever. Their love was no longer just a connection. It was their future. And no matter what came next, Arden knew they would face it, side by side. Chapter 16. The Quiet Before the Storm. Days passed in a quiet, comfortable rhythm. The tension that had once clouded their every moment had eased, replaced by a sense of peace that Arden had never known before. Elias had opened up to him in ways Arden never thought possible, and the space between them seemed to shrink with each passing day. But Arden couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test them both. One evening, as they sat by the campfire, Arden noticed Elias looking off into the distance, his expression distant. The warmth between them had been replaced by an unsettling coldness that Arden couldn't understand. "Elias," Arden asked softly, his voice laced with concern. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Elias glanced at him, his eyes clouded with something unreadable. "I'm just thinking," he replied quietly. "We've come so far, but I can't help wondering if it'll all be enough." Arden leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Elias. "What do you mean?" "You've done nothing but give me your trust, Elias. And I'll never take it for granted." Elias reached out, his fingers brushing against Arden's hand. "I know," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm not sure I can be everything you need." Arden squeezed his hand, pulling Elias closer. "You are everything I need. I'm here for you. Always." Elias closed his eyes, his breath hitching as he leaned into Arden, needing his touch, his warmth. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly grew more urgent. It was a kiss that spoke of the unspoken fears they both had, a kiss that confirmed they were in this together, no matter what. Chapter 17. Testing Limits. The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster. Arden and Elias were pulled between moments of deep intimacy and sudden emotional distance. Each time they came together, the bond between them solidified, but the next morning, there was always a sense of unease in Elias' eyes. One night, as they shared a quiet dinner, Arden noticed Elias staring at the fire, his gaze far away. Something in his posture told Arden that Elias was about to retreat again, and he wouldn't let it happen this time. "You can't keep pushing me away," Arden said, his voice firm but filled with warmth. "I know you're scared. I am, too. But that doesn't mean we can't face this together." Elias looked up, his eyes dark and filled with conflicting emotions. "I don't know how to be with someone like you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be loved without expecting it to fall apart." Arden reached across the table, cupping Elias' face in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere. I love you, Elias. All of you. Even the parts that scare you." The vulnerability in Elias' eyes was enough to break Arden's heart. He leaned in, kissing him deeply, pouring every ounce of love he felt into it. Their kiss became more desperate, more passionate, as if they were trying to prove to each other that they were here for the long haul. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I'm not leaving," Arden repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know you're not either." Chapter 18. The Storm Hits. The storm Arden had feared finally arrived, but it wasn't the kind he'd expected. Their peaceful world was shattered when a group of men, former allies of Elias, showed up unexpectedly, demanding that he return to his old life. The tension in the air was thick, and for the first time, Arden saw Elias' face change, like a mask had fallen, and a darker side of him emerged. Elias stood tall, his back straight, but Arden could see the internal struggle in his eyes. These men represented a life he had tried to leave behind, a life he feared would pull him back. "They don't know me anymore," Elias said, his voice cold as he addressed the men. "I'm not the same person I was." Arden could see the tension in Elias' shoulders, the way his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but he knew this was a battle Elias had to fight on his own. One of the men stepped forward, sneering. "You think you've changed? You can't outrun your past, Elias. Arden stepped forward, standing beside Elias, his voice strong. He's changed. And so have I. You'll have to deal with us both. The confrontation escalated quickly, but Elias remained steady, his gaze unwavering as he faced the men. With a calm voice, he spoke, his words cutting through the tension. I'm done with you. I'm done with everything you stand for. I'm never going back. Elias turned to Arden, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something deeper. Without another word, they turned and walked away, leaving the men behind. Chapter 19. Reckoning. As they walked, the weight of the confrontation settled heavily on both of them. They had faced a significant challenge together, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Arden knew that Elias was still carrying the scars of his past, but now they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. When they finally stopped for the night, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Arden sat down beside Elias, his hand brushing against his, offering comfort without forcing it. I never wanted to be that person again, Elias admitted, his voice hoarse. But when they showed up, I felt like I was about to lose everything. Again. Arden placed a hand on his shoulder, turning him to face him. You didn't lose me, he said softly. You didn't lose us. Elias looked at him, his eyes softening. I don't deserve you, he whispered, his voice cracking. But I can't lose you either. Arden pulled him close, his arms wrapping around Elias, holding him tightly. You won't lose me, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, as they stood together, surrounded by the quiet of the night, they both understood that their bond was unbreakable. No matter the challenges they faced, they would face them together. Chapter 20. Into the Unknown. With the storm behind them, Arden and Elias found themselves at a crossroads. There was no turning back now, no returning to the lives they had once known. They were on a new path, one that neither of them could predict. But it was theirs, and that was enough. As they prepared to continue their journey, Arden turned to Elias, his heart swelling with affection. Where do we go from here? Elias smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Arden's heart skip a beat. Wherever the road takes us, he said quietly. As long as we're together. Arden leaned in, kissing him tenderly, a promise to continue forward, no matter what came their way. The world was wide and unknown, but for the first time in his life, Arden wasn't afraid. With Elias by his side, he knew they could face anything. Their kiss deepened, the promise of a future together hanging in the air, unspoken but understood. Whatever the unknown held, they would face it, together. Chapter 21. The Calm Before the Change. The morning after the storm was eerily quiet. Arden woke to find Elias already sitting by the fire, his expression distant. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle between them like an unspoken tension. It was a rare moment of silence, one that Arden had come to appreciate. In these moments, he could feel the depth of their connection, even if they didn't speak. Arden approached quietly, sitting beside Elias, his hand brushing against his. There was something different in the way Elias was staring into the flames, something almost lost. Elias, Arden said softly, his voice tentative. We've been through a lot. I just want you to know that I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Elias finally looked at him, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that took Arden's breath away. I don't know what's wrong with me, Elias admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Every time we get closer, I pull away. It's like I'm scared of losing you. Arden reached out, his fingers gently touching Elias' cheek. You won't lose me. Not unless you push me away, and I'm not going anywhere. Elias leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly. I'm afraid, Arden. Afraid of getting too close and having it all fall apart. Arden could feel the raw emotion in Elias' words. His heart ached for him, but he knew this was something they both had to face. Without another word, Arden pulled him into a tight embrace, their bodies pressed together as if to reassure each other of their unwavering presence. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, of the trust they had, of the bond they were building. Their kiss came slowly at first, soft and gentle, as if testing the waters of their emotions. But it deepened quickly, becoming urgent, filled with the passion that had been building between them for weeks. Their hands roamed, tracing the contours of each other's bodies, each touch intensifying the connection. The kiss was their promise, a vow that no matter what, they would face their fears together. Chapter 22. Unspoken Words. Days passed, but the unspoken words between them still hung in the air. The bond between them had never been more apparent, but there was something beneath the surface that neither of them had addressed. Arden could see it in Elias' eyes, an ache that hadn't gone away. That night, after they'd set up camp and were sitting by the fire again, Arden decided it was time to face the elephant in the room. "Elias," Arden started, his voice serious but gentle. "I know there's something you're not saying. I can see it in your eyes. What are you so afraid of?" Elias looked at him, the walls that had once been so firmly in place starting to crumble. He took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I'm afraid of not being enough for you. You've seen me at my worst, Arden, and I don't know if I can be the person you need." Arden reached out, his hand gently resting on Elias' knee. "You are everything I need. All of you, Elias. I love you. Your scars, your fears, your strength. It's all a part of you, and that's all I need." The words were simple, but they hit Elias like a tidal wave. He didn't know what to say, so he did the only thing that felt right. He kissed Arden, his lips crashing against his with a raw intensity that left them both breathless. Their kiss was slow at first, a reassurance, before turning desperate, their hands exploring each other's bodies, pulling them closer. Elias' hands slid under Arden's shirt, caressing the skin of his back, as if memorizing the feel of him. Arden responded in kind, his hands moving to Elias' chest, feeling the hard muscle under his fingers, the warmth of his skin, the steady rhythm of his heart. Every touch felt like an unspoken promise that they would weather whatever storm came next, together. They pulled away, their breathing heavy, eyes locked in an intimate gaze that spoke louder than words ever could. "I'm not afraid anymore," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. "Not as long as I have you." Chapter 23. The Breaking Point. It wasn't long before the world outside their intimate bubble came crashing back into their lives. One evening, as they were traveling through a dense forest, they encountered a group of hostile strangers. They were older men, rough-looking, and the moment their eyes locked onto Elias, there was a predatory gleam in their gaze. "Elias," one of them sneered. "You thought you could escape? You belong with us, not running around with some boy." Elias tensed, his body reacting before he even had a chance to think. Arden stepped closer to him, standing in front of Elias, his eyes narrowing at the group of men. "You don't know him. You don't get to tell him who he is," Arden growled, his voice low but filled with a protective fury. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed like a fight might erupt. But Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. "I don't belong to any of you," he said, his words cutting through the air. "I belong to myself now." Arden stood by his side, silently agreeing, but the group wasn't backing down. Arden could feel the danger creeping closer, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep his cool. Without warning, the men lunged, and the battle began. Arden fought with all his might, using every ounce of his strength to protect Elias. It wasn't about the fight itself, it was about protecting the bond they'd built, about ensuring that nothing would come between them. After it was over, both of them were bruised, bloodied, and exhausted. Elias leaned against Arden, his breath ragged but relieved. "I can't do this without you," Elias said, his voice quiet but intense. Arden kissed him gently, a soft reassurance that they were in this together. "You don't have to." Chapter 24. Breaking Through. In the days that followed, the tension between them was palpable. But it wasn't a tension of fear, it was a tension of growth, of something deeper blossoming between them. Their bond had been tested, and each time, they had come out stronger. One night, as they lay under the stars, Arden pulled Elias close, his fingers brushing through his hair. They had been through so much, but now, in this moment of peace, Arden felt the weight of it all lift. "I never thought I could feel like this," Arden murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought someone could mean so much to me." Elias turned to face him, his eyes soft and filled with affection. You're my home, Arden. I didn't know I was looking for it until I found you. Arden kissed him, tender and slow, as if savoring the moment. Their love wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Chapter 25. Forever Together. As they reached the end of their journey, Arden and Elias found themselves at the edge of something new. The world stretched out before them, full of possibilities, but there was no fear in their hearts. They had found each other, and nothing, no past, no fear, could tear them apart. Elias pulled Arden close, his hands on his face, as if memorizing the feel of him. We've made it, haven't we? Arden smiled, kissing him softly. Together. The final kiss they shared was a promise, of love, of strength, of a future that would never be easy, but would always be worth it. And as they stood together, facing the unknown, they knew they could handle whatever came next, as long as they had each other.